Welcome to our very first episode of Shared Learning, where we share the stories of impactful learning at ISS. And I'm really excited to start these episodes with Sarah Osborne, our DT teacher. And Sarah, you've got a really interesting project that you're working on in middle school. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening?
So my grade 7 class are working with the toddler section, which is new this year, and they're developing a sensory wall for the kids.
One of the things that really interested me about the project is the way that you've kind of incorporated the needs of the client and the way the students are engaging with the client. So can you talk a little bit about, those first meetings and how the project has emerged?
So we just jumped in at the deep end on the first lesson, and we went down and met the client, and which was the 2 teachers that teach down in the section, and they talked through about the toddlers, the age group, what they were looking for, the fact that it had to be a wall-mounted piece. Mm-hmm. They talked about the function of it. They also talked about the aesthetics of it, what sort of materials they're tending to use down there, and the look of the classroom and how they got it set up. And so the students got to ask loads of questions, and one of them was like the note taker, so recorded everything. And then we went back to the classroom and had a big debrief and went through everything and wrote up notes about what we got from that meeting and what the client expected, what they were looking for, what criteria we had to meet. And then the next stage was a big brainstorming session where they all started just writing down ideas of what could be made, what was appropriate for toddlers, what would interest them, mm-hmm. from the information that they got from the teachers, from the client. And then so that was a big that ended up being like lots of written notes and sketches that were ordered into the different senses, like touch, sight, taste, hearing. So that was all ordered onto different sheets. And then from that step, then they organised themselves into groups of who they wanted to work with and who was interested in doing what. And then they had to start drawing up ideas from that and thinking through, like one of the toddlers in particular liked to go to the oven and switch all the switches. So that was an obvious thing. That's something that involved like turning things or switching things. So one group decided they were going to tackle that. Other group became interested in textures and started working down that line. So there was lots of big sort of brainstorming sessions, developing ideas, trying to get things down on paper, thinking about materials, and also a bit of sustainability in there. We needed to think about recycling, what mm-hmm. we could use that we already had that was appropriate for that space.
One thing that was really interesting when I was in the classroom visiting the other day, whenever I asked the students what it was like to go back to visit to the toddlers, their eyes just completely lit up. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about maybe what you noticed on that second visit that you had when the students went back with their initial project ideas?
Yeah, so it got to the point where they'd made some of the ideas had started to come through. So they decided that they wanted to go back to the classroom and meet the teachers and the toddlers and present their ideas and see whether we were going in the right direction or whether they needed to tweak things. But they just loved going to the classroom, and it turned from presenting their ideas to a lot of fact-finding. So they were playing with the toddlers.
Oh, yeah.
They were playing with the toys that the toddlers used. So it changed. Not all of the designs, but some of the designs were rethought. And
why do you think that experience with toddlers had some impact on the designs themselves? Like what were some of the conversations that were happening in the classroom with students or maybe with you? Like
in the classroom with the teachers and the toddlers?
Yeah, I'm really curious what that interaction was like and how that helped them to think through their projects, your students.
Well, I guess there was safety is a really important part of it, that they had to make sure that their what they were making was safe. And I think they realised that actually how strong toddlers are and determined, and that maybe some of the things they were thinking of doing might not have lasted very long. And I think they got that from being with the toddlers and talking to the teachers, but also looking at the toys that the toddlers were using. Mm-hmm. And I think they just really enjoyed the interaction with the toddlers and just, yeah.
Yeah, like I said, it was so great to see the reactions from your students when they talked about their visit.
Yeah, I think they'd be down there every lesson if they could possibly manage it. But they're already talking about, they've got to the next step, which was going back, looking at what they'd made, and then, revisiting it and reflecting on it and making it better or reorganizing it or redesigning it in some instances. So the next step is to go back to the toddlers and get them to test out some of the things that they've made.
You spoke a little bit about sort of overcoming some motivational issues because of having a real client. When we spoke earlier, you talked about, you noticed the difference. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it has made a huge difference because I think that it's not an abstract client. It's somebody that they can go up the hall and visit and show, and they can try it out there and then, rather than a sort of an imaginary client that we've formulated for a design brief. Is actually somebody there that they can talk to and get feedback from and then move forward. And I think it makes a difference because they seem more open to changing their design or understanding where they could push their design a bit further or off in a different direction. Whereas before they might just go, no, this is it, it's finished. They seem more open to that feedback and critical feedback, that they can change what they've done and move it forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you say that, because in conversations when I visited the room yesterday, that's exactly what I was hearing. Well, I heard from toddlers that these are the kinds of things that they play with, or I saw them playing with these certain toys. And it was really interesting to see how that they were using sort of that information as they were going forward.
Yeah.
I'm also maybe interested in the kind of community building, that if you have a sense of having those visits and whether or not the middle schoolers see themselves in a different way.
I think, they love going up there and they love visiting the classroom and going to a different part of the school. I'm sure that would be the same if it was an outside commission too, just going somewhere different. But I think the big thing for them is going to be seeing it in situ at the end and seeing the children playing with it. I think they're going to have a sense of pride and achievement from the finished piece.
You mentioned, I think going off of that, you mentioned also this idea of the value of this project can come out a lot in the reflection that happens afterwards. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what you expect, or maybe how you plan to do the reflection process with your students?
I think once the piece is up on the wall and finished, and they can see the children interacting with it and get some feedback from them and the teachers and possibly the parents as well, and then they can go away and reflect on the whole process. I think actually I think the reflection is going to be so important because they've gone through so many different steps, but I don't actually think they realise that they're doing it. They're doing client meetings, they're reorganising their thoughts, they're redesigning, they're testing their designs, then they're testing again, which is what a designer would do. And sometimes you have to go right the way back to the beginning and start all over again. And they seem more open to doing that because we've got a real life client, it seems, and they can get that feedback quite quickly from them.
It's really interesting. And when I was watching you work and facilitating with some questions and some kind of critical thinking dialogue that you had with your students, it seemed like that was a really natural part of that project. So it must have been there since the beginning. As my own reflection, it seems like there's something that's really cool happening in the DT room.
Well, I think so. I love it. I think it's great. I mean, it's hands-on learning, isn't it? But they're talking all the time, and they're having to problem solve as they go along. And they're not. The big thing in designing something is not going with your first idea is to try things out and not be frightened of things not going not be frightened of things going wrong, but to be happy to accept that it hasn't worked and try something else and see a way through it.
It's such a really valuable lesson that we talked earlier, and it's like, well, I can imagine that as such a vital part of a research process or writing a paper or whatever you're doing in school. So
there's a great, so Leo and Juan have made this amazing piece that turns, and it's got not glitter, but it's got beads in it. And the toddler teacher talked about how if you have something of a contrasting colour, it's really good for the toddlers, for them to focus on it and follow it. So they found some very thin sequins that they put in. So they thought they'd finished. They got it all stacked and and the handle on, and it was turning great. And then they discovered that the very small sequins were sticking between the acrylic and the laser ply. So that was another problem that they hadn't thought about, but they were quite open to taking it all apart and trying to find a solution, find something that they could use that wouldn't slip between the acrylic and the laser ply. And that was, they came up with that idea really quickly of what they could do to make it better, to improve it.
It goes back to what you're saying. When there's a real client, there's a real purpose for this.
Yeah.
We better find some kind of solution, right?
It's not like, that'll be fine.
Yeah.
It was like, oh no, it's got to work.
It's got to work.
Yeah.
Sarah, from this project, is there maybe one thing that you take away that you'll maybe apply in some of your other work, whether it's an idea or a strategy?
I think real life clients is the big takeaway that they can interview. I think it makes a big difference.
That's great. I really, really appreciate this conversation. I think a lot of others in our community will as well. So once again, Sarah, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome.